is Alexander Nikitin. Today we held a presentation with my colleague Dmitry Gorchakov, and we would like to present the new report by Bellona about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. We are going to discuss today whether it is realistic, necessary, possible to restart some units of this nuclear power plant occupied by Russia. That is a very interesting object, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. It's the first time in the history of the Western nuclear objects that such a power plant has been occupied by a state being in war against a different state. That's not a usual case, so that's why a lot of people show interest to this situation, and Bellona is not an exception. We are observing the situation around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and it's highly important to understand what technical, political solutions are relevant for this object. At the moment, there are three parties in this process. On one hand, there is Russian Federation, the country which has occupied this nuclear power plant. Second party is Ukraine. Ukraine still is a legal owner of this nuclear power plant, and the IAEA, the international organization. So these are the three structures which can, and do influence the situation around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. In the last months, we see more and more interviews in mass medias where people state that the nuclear power plant might be restarted. In our opinion, this is not the information we might consider as good news. We see this perspective pretty negative. The restart of units of nuclear power plant is a pretty dangerous experiment. And this experiment might lead to nuclear incidents in the future. We are listening very carefully to what the politicians are saying. We heard and saw that Vladimir Putin has met the general director of IAEA in Sochi. And according to the information we have received, Vladimir Putin stated that Russia has plans for restarting the nuclear power plant units. There were no time has been set for that. But still, that is already an official statement. We already heard about a lot of meetings of Mr. Likhachov, the general director of Rosatom, with the general director of IAEA. And there, Mr. Likhachov also stated that Russia is working towards restarting the nuclear power plant units. Mr. Likhachov also doesn't provide a lot of details, doesn't name any date for this plan. However, we can rely on the fact that in the upcoming 2-3 months, no steps will be done in this direction. I would like to remind you that this power plant has 6 units. There are 4 units with American fuel and 2 units with Russian fuel. In our opinion, this decision to restart or not to restart a unit of the power plant can be made only by the political leader of the Russian Federation. I mean, Vladimir Putin. There are no other actors who might give a command to restart units of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Of course, Ukraine is against that. To our surprise, Ukraine is reacting pretty calm. The administration of this object from the Ukrainian side states that it's not likely to restart the nuclear power plant units. That is connected with some technical aspects, which my colleague Dmitry Gorchakov will share with you after I'm finished with my introduction. This decision about the restart of a unit is, in our opinion, a political mistake. We have written a report, which you might have a look upon, and in this report we speak that restart of such a nuclear power plant unit might lead to a nuclear and radiation incident. It is a pretty dangerous step. The nuclear plant is currently several dozens kilometers away from the front line, and a lot of shells are flying over the power plant, there and back. Both sides have weapons situated close to the power plant. There is also a weapon supply and on the premises of the nuclear plant itself, because Russia states the station needs to be protected. There is a minefield around the nuclear power plant, so there are a lot of weapons. The representatives and specialists of IAEA are currently also present on the premises as observers. And we are sure that if Russia decides to restart a unit of the power plant, the observers present on the premises of the nuclear plant will see that. They will see the preparation process for restart of the nuclear power plant units. There are some steps necessary to be done in beforehand. There are several technical aspects to be considered. My colleague will tell you in more details about the works which need to be done so that a unit of this power plant could be restarted at all. So now I would like to pass the word to my colleague Dmitry Gorchakov. Thank you, Mr. Nikitin. I also greet everyone who joined our translation, and thank you for showing interest to our report. This report is available for 2 days already, and I'm pretty sure that everyone showing interest to this topic have already seen it. In my presentation, I would like to speak on several technical aspects, but I will also try not to dive too deep into the details. We also will have a Q&A session after I'm finished, so should anything stay unclear, you might ask me a question. Just a second, I will start the presentation. I hope that you can see it. That's our report, which you hopefully have already seen, and I will today speak of 3 technical aspects needed to be considered before restart of a nuclear unit. These are at least technical aspects where we have a chance to analyze anything. I speak of water supply of the nuclear power plant. Second aspect is the connection to electricity grids. And the third topic is fuel loading. Let us start with the water supply system. That is a plan of the nuclear power plant. You see that the 6 units of the nuclear plant look pretty small comparing to the cooling pond situation situated nearby. And cooling pond is an integral part of the water supply system of a nuclear power plant. 1/3 of the energy produced by the nuclear reactor are converted to the electricity, and the cooling system is needed to drive away the heat which comes up during the electricity production. So for the discharge, you need more than 12,000 megawatt of heat. That is a huge water consumption. In full power mode, it's over 900,000 cubical meters a day. After the nuclear power plant was taken over, it was impossible to refill the cooling pond, and that is a huge question. You also see some numbers. For example, the water consumption in full power mode, well, when all 6 units were working. The nuclear power plant consumed around 1 million cubical meters per day, and the most water volume went through this cooling pond. That is an process which is also integral for a nuclear power plant. You need a lot of water, and most of the water volume just is circulating in the cooling pond. Starting from September 2022, all the units are in the cold shutdown mode. For some time, several units were in the hot shutdown mode, but at the moment, all 6 units are in the most secure mode, in the cold shutdown mode. The reactors are not producing heat in this mode, but the nuclear fuel in the reactors still produce some heat, and this heat needs to be driven away. That is used not with a big cooling point, but with a system of 11 wells, which you can see here on this slide. These 11 wells actually cover the needs of the power plant in full at the moment. You can see the results of our analysis. You need 1 to 2,000 cubical meters per day. That's the water consumption in the cold shutdown mode, and the 11 wells I mentioned are providing a total of 6,000 cubical meters a day. So that is more than enough. The cooling pond is still there, but we can see that after the Kakhovka reservoir was drained, the water level went down to almost 15 meters. So the decrease was 1.4 meters. And in this slide, you can see the water level in the plant in this pond. In orange, you see the summer and autumn months, and in blue, you see the winter and early spring months. The water consumption varies depending on the season, and the water level in the cooling pond must stay on a certain level. This information is also present in our report, but I won't go into deeper details at the moment. Here you also can see some numbers. You see the total today water supply from 11 wells. You see the today water consumption in shutdown mode, and also the natural evaporation from cooling pond surface. What is Russia planning and doing? There were several official statements about Russia planning to build a new pumping station to keep the water level of the cooling points. That was the official argument. 18,000 cubical meters per day. That is the capacity which was announced for the future pumping station. It is still unknown where exactly it might be constructed. In our report, we describe 2 possible sites where Rosatom might build such a new pumping station. We also agree with Greenpeace. Greenpeace has also analyzed the situation in May, and they also came to the conclusion that these 2 sites are the most probable ones. Here we speak about bed of the Dnieper River and bed of the Konka River nearby. So these are the 2 most probable locations. Let us look at these locations in more details. The first site is the place of regular water intake. There are 2 plants there, the nuclear power plant and the thermal power plant, and they both had the same source of water. So here you see this place of regular water intake, and on the left part of the slide, you can even see the water intake pipe. Right now, this pipe is in the Konka bed of the Konka River. Right now, this pipe is lying on the surface. Of course, it cannot work in this state. So the idea is that the current infrastructure might be used to lead the water from the Konka River to the water system of the power plant. Another important aspect, on the right side of the slide, you see several red-colored circles, and there are different trenches and firing positions. Mr. Nikitin has mentioned already that there is a minefield around the nuclear power plant. The Russian troops have created a huge defense system around the power plant, also in the areas where the new potential pumping station might be located. Due to this fact, it's possible that the observers of IAEA are restricted to get access to these areas. The access of the observers is actually pretty restricted at the moment, but if the decision should be made to build a new pump station in this area, the observers won't have access to it. The second possible area can be seen on this slide. On the right top part of it, you see a yellow circle. It's the old bed of the river Konka. Here you have the width of around 300 meters of the riverbed Konka, and it's more than enough to create a system of water supply. In red, you again see the trenches and the protection measures taken by the Russian troops. might be possible that some of these trenches are actually already preparation works done for the construction of a new pump station, but that is unclear. In our opinion, it might be possible to build such a pump station already by the end of this year, and that would solve the problem with the water supply. Now, if we try to analyze the information I have presented, we see that the pump station will provide enough water to restart at least one unit of the nuclear power point during the summer heat time, and up to 3 units by the time of winter. The capacity of the pump station might be even bigger than it's needed for 1 unit only. So that's why I spoke about the possibility of restarting 3 different blocks.
The second quite important aspect is related to the connection of the ZNPP to the power grid, because, well, obviously, the energy manufactured at the ZNPP has to be supplied somewhere, and we have to know what are the limitations here. This is even a more important issue than the one related to water supply. Here on this slide, you can see the system of electronic grids of ZNPP with the electric grids of the Ukraine. Let me remind you that this is the biggest nuclear power plants of Europe. That's why it is connected with the very well distributed electric grid with very different levels of, with very different voltages. We can see here that some of substations has the voltage of about 750 kilovolts. That is the one that was used to supply the biggest share of electricity manufactured at ZNPP. You see here the other network, which is also used to distribute the generated electrical capacity. But as I told you before, since September 2022, the ZNPP does not manufacture any energy. It only uses the energy for its own security and safety system. So that part of the system of this network is now required for safety and security of the power plant. Only 3 lines out of these big systems are now in operation. The ones that are oriented towards the north, the one that's passing here through the front line, the Dniprovskaya substation, 750 kilovolts, and the Ferrosplavne 1 and 2, 330 kilovolts. The one that doesn't really go very far to Nikopol. The remaining lines of this grid are not in operation so far, but mostly those allocated on the occupied territories. Those might be put into operation when and if Russia connect the ZNPP to its own power grid, to the big Russian power grid, and when and if Russia starts taking that manufactured electricity to its territories. Or another scenario is Russia cutting off those 2 parts that are still related to Ukrainian electrical systems and grids. Ukraine is still getting electricity from there, even though there are so many difficulties there. Several times during the occupation, the ZNPP was completely cut off from the electrical system, and it was operating with the diesel generator only. Russia, though, can easily try and connect ZNPP to its own electrical grid, explaining that with safety reasons, just to make it more stable. That might be an explanation, and that might even be a rationale, well, not for approval from IAEA, but for the absence of any, contradictions. That might even become some kind of a rationale for the restart of ZNPP. If Russia decides to restart the reactors, well, first, it will definitely connect its electrical grids to the Russian electrical grids, because during the delayed. In the recent couple of years, we've seen several times how Russia was doing everything to destroy electrical grid of Ukraine. So the only option is to connect it to the Russian side. What is the most important factor to switch the ZNPP to the Russian electrical grid? Well, it has the open system. It has an open switch yard. Several times Russia has declared that its specialists are doing some repair works there, which is necessary for further connection to the Russian electrical grid. We have a different piece of information. Indeed, since fall 2023, we see repairs and restoration happening on that territories. And that might probably be happening because, well, Russia's intent is to reconnect ZNPP to its electric system. As far as we can see, all of those works can actually be finished till the end of this summer, and reconnection might happen in a month. If we want to have a wider look to the whole electrical system of occupied territories, we can try and analyze where will the energy manufactured at ZNPP go to if Russia tries to reconnect it. Here we see a number of significant limitations. Those green lines, 750 kilovolts, the one that are generated and are able to transport the biggest capacity of electricity, well, most of them are directed either towards Ukraine or, well, what I'm trying to say is like only 2 of them are going to the occupied territories. Crimea, Novaya Kakhovka, that is the one of them, and the other towards Mariupol. We can analyze now what is the capacity of these lines and come to the following conclusion. There are several bottlenecks here and obviously some limitations. For the one that goes towards Crimea, the line going from ZNPP towards Crimea, it's not more than 1,000 megawatts, but that one is almost on the front line, which is making it quite difficult to operate. Even if it is an operation, which we don't know for sure, it will be quite complicated to maintain it, which means that this line is almost out of reach for Russia. There are different lines with smaller voltage, the ones with 330 kilovolts, but obviously it can only be used for smaller voltage. And also another lines that are going towards Russia, not more than 400 megawatts can go on that line. There are also limitations related to the demand. Well, we can give Crimea as much as we want, but actually Crimea doesn't need that much. The whole Crimean Peninsula doesn't need that more than 400 megawatts. That's exactly how much they're getting right now. There is not much point in sending so much energy towards Crimea. The same is true for all the other occupied territories. We've analyzed the data from Rosatom and Ministry of Energy of Russian. Up to 70% of all of the energy manufactured on the occupied territories are manufactured within those territories, and only the remaining 30% is delivered from Russian Federation. If there is additional energy is being transported from the outside, even if that happens, there is still a lot of free capacity at the ZNPP, which means that there is no point and no sense in relaunching more than one unit. But even if one unit is being relaunched, there still will be a lot of problems because that will be the biggest one on the occupied territories, and it will be very complicated to balance it out. In case there are cutoffs or some problems, there won't be anything to substitute it with. And well, obviously, if there is an accident or something happens to it, that will bring immediately additional nuclear risks. That is a general analysis, exactly the conclusions from everything I just said. There is no point of launching more than one unit ZNPP because, well, there is simply no need for so much energy. Also, the reconnection of the ZNPP to the Russian energy grid can be explained by the Rosatom with the idea of making ZNPP more secure and safe. And this can be done in the nearest month. Russia might try and reconnect the ZNPP to its electrical grid in the nearest month. Third question is related to the fuel loading. Obviously, to launch the nuclear unit, it has to contain enough volume of fuel. As my colleague just told, it is a mix of fuel used at ZNPP, Russian and American Westinghouse. Russian Federation has consecutively been transitioning from American to Russian fuel. The fifth unit of ZNPP is only using the Westinghouse fuel since 2019. You can have a look at the table here. The half of them are still operating. Well, if they were operating, they will be operating on a mixed load. And two of them, number 2 and number 6, would only use Rosatom, Russian fuel. For 2 years already, those 2 units are in cold shutdown. The fuel is not in operation, but it hasn't been unloaded. The question is whether this fuel can still be used. There is a possibility that the fuel, in case of a restart of some of those units, the fuel will have to be completely reloaded and not in the way it is done in a routine operation. There is another question whether there is enough fresh and new fuel on the territory of ZNPP, because I can guess that Rosatom will not be using American Westinghouse fuel, and they will definitely need some fresh and new Russian nuclear fuel. If it's not there on the territory of ZNPP, it will have to be brought there, which will cause additional difficulties because the transportation of nuclear materials on the territory of a military conflict obviously creates a lot of additional risks. Those are general conclusions. Our suggestion is that if Rosatom is indeed going to restart some units, that most probably will be Unit 2 or Unit 6, where they already have all the equipment required for using Rosatom fuel. If there is a need to bring the fuel, well, additional risks might appear. Also, if we see some activity related to the reloading of fuel, there won't be any other reasonable explanation but for the need to restart the unit. Even though IAEA mission has to deal with a lot of obstacles and they cannot really get access to all the territories, but they will still notice that if that will start happening. IAEA inspectors will probably observe that something is happening not later than several weeks before the restart of the unit. So we have to keep a close eye on that. Overall conclusions. The main conclusion is that if Rosatom even starts to relaunch any of the units, it won't be more than one unit, and the chances are it most likely will be Unit 2 or Unit 4. Technically, Rosatom has capacities to start preparing for this activity, and some of it is not such a bad idea. For example, reconnection to Russian electrical grids or water supply system, which will indeed improve the safety and security of the NPP. But the decision to restart NPP is a political one. From what we can see, this decision hasn't been made yet, but Rosatom is preparing for that possibility. Why have we written this report and why do we analyze that? Because there is a lot of conversations around this possible restart of ZNPP. Those conversations might arise from some political or diplomatic intentions, but technically, we believe that we described everything that we have to be aware of. This is what we have to be aware of to understand what is actually happening in preparation for the restart of the ZNPP. In current war and military situation, the restart of even one of those units will significantly increase potential nuclear risks. We do have monitoring instruments and surveillance instruments. We've demonstrated some of them, and we believe it's very important to have a look at this, at what is happening on the ground, and clearly separate that from political or diplomatic statements that will preserve around this topic of ZNPP restart. Right now, we can talk about some other aspects that are not part of technical issue, because there is a lot to talk about indeed. Yes, you're right. There is a lot of conversations happening around that topic, and we receive a lot of questions related to that potential restart of ZNPP. I hope that Dmitry's report was clear enough, because, well, he's so good at explaining all the technical parts of it. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. It will be a pleasure for us to answer them, or you might actually send us a separate message after the presentation, or after you have a proper look at our report. You can always reach out to us and we will send you the answer. There are several things I would like to draw your attention to. Well, first, very important, we have already received some comments from our colleagues saying, isn't your report a clear roadmap for Russian Federation of what specifically they have to do to restart the ZNPP? You can take my word for it. This is not a checklist to complete to restart the ZNPP. Our goal wasn't really to write an instruction or a roadmap for Russia to help them understand what has to be done to restart it. They don't need our expertise to do that. That's to begin with. And well, secondly, our main goal was to analyze the situation. Technically, what steps have to be completed in order to restart the ZNPP. We're also getting a different kind of questions. What does Bellona say? Are they going to restart it or not? I'm going to answer this question now, and that will be my personal opinion. My colleague here might have a different one. My opinion is the following. I don't think Russian Federation is going to restart the Zaporizhzhia power plant. Why do I believe so? Well, first, everyone knows that just recently in Switzerland, there was that event during which, if I'm not mistaken, representatives of about 9 countries have signed an agreement. And one of the items of that plan or agreement was to bring back the ZNPP to its rightful owner. There wasn't anything about restart or deoccupation or anything else. It was about bringing it back to its rightful owner. By the way, today, the Hungarian leader who visited Kiev yesterday or the day before yesterday also mentioned in his statement the need for Russia to bring ZNPP back under Ukrainian control, which is an international consensus. Having this international consensus, well, Russia has to consider that. Russia shouldn't be risking with restarting ZNPP. That's one reason. There is a second reason. All the technical aspects just covered by Dmitry, on one hand, those are very complicated, but on the other hand, it's impossible to hide those kinds of activities. And I believe that, well, if there is no agreement, and if Russia is to say that it's going to do everything that is needed to relaunch ZNPP, then Ukraine will react and do something to prevent that from happening. Of course, it's not really possible that Ukraine will start attacking the NPP in order to make the Russian military powers go away of there. But I think everything that's related to the electricity grid, onto the water supply, they will try and do something to prevent the restart from happening. That's the scenario that's most probable in case of the real intent from the Russian side to restart it. And the last thing here, the last question rather, the question that we're getting, can IAEA do something to prevent the restart from happening? We've written about that several times. International Agency of Atomic Energy is a very important structure. IAEA is very important when it comes to peaceful use of nuclear energy and when it comes to the future of nuclear energy. But unfortunately, IAEA doesn't have any functional capacities, any resources, and IAEA doesn't really have any right to forbid someone to do something. In the situation that is now on the territory of ZNPP, IAEA unfortunately can't do much. Yes, they are present there on the ground. They are now monitoring the situation, and every week they are publishing their reports, which we can actually have a look at. It is all published at the IAEA website. But in those reports, we can only find the information that they have access to. As we have already told, some of the information is beyond the reach of IAEA because they just can't get access and they are not allowed to all the premises at ZNPP. That is why my answer is that no, they cannot do anything to prevent that from happening. But right now, IAEA declares that they are against the potential restart of the
To my surprise, Ukraine is looking very calmly on the perspective of nuclear power plant restart. They tell all the time, no, they won't be capable of restarting the power plant. What do they mean by that? They mean actually pretty concrete things. The steps Russia has to do to restart the units. We have already spoken about these reasons before. There are, for example, units which are using American fuel or partly using American, partly Russian fuel. These units are extremely complicated to be restarted. The active zone where this fuel is situated is not a simple gasoline tank as in a car. You can't just put different fuel into it and start using it again. There is a complicated regulation system, a lot of mechanisms and technical aspects which have to be considered, etc., etc. So it's a pretty complicated process. So if the active zone has been changed, the whole infrastructure and the whole equipment around has been changed as well. So that's a huge question whether Russia is capable or eager to use this infrastructure. And another aspect is also the problem with the specialists. Ukraine states that Russia won't be able to physically find the necessary amount of the specialists. Russia, on the other hand, states that they have partly kept the specialists from the nuclear power plant. The question states what kind of people these are, whether these are just simple workers or real atomic specialists. We do not know that. So Russia also has a lot of specialists in this field, but no one wants to live so close to the front line. We ourselves hope very much that no restart of energy units of the nuclear plant will take place. And we hope that the situation will stay more or less stable so that we don't have to live through a nuclear major event. Of course, we won't have a situation comparable to Chernobyl, that is for sure, but still, any nuclear incidents are not good in general. That's basically it from my side. Dmitry, maybe you would like to say something. Maybe you do not agree with me. Yeah, actually, I do agree with you. I could add something to what you have said. I have mentioned certain steps which are necessary for the future restart. Some of these steps have a value on their own, like connecting the power plant to the Russian energy grid. This step is generally of use for Russia. Russia is already using the whole volume of propaganda against Ukraine. But if Ukraine decides to somehow act against this reconnection of the power plant to the Russian grid, for example, start bombing the energies, not the plant itself, but for example, the grid connection facilities, Russia will become more active in this propaganda field. Again, as I said, some steps can be done without restarting the units. Whether the units are going to be restarted or not, we don't know at the moment. But the situation can change, and might be possible that Russia decides to somehow use this power plant as a major risk factor in the region. We have not discussed here what dangers can be found behind the restart. You might have a Fukushima scenario, for example. Should an energy unit be restarted and some problems comes up, the incident might come up in several hours. Right now, we rather speak of days and weeks if something goes wrong. As long as units are in the cold shutdown mode, the situation is stable. If Russia decides to change the situation and restart a unit, some problems might come up. This equipment is fragile, and bringing it to shutdown mode and restarting again is not the simplest process. Do we have some questions? Yeah, we do. I wanted to add another thing to the topic of IAEA. Yes, they also took part in the negotiations. And that rings a bell, which I don't like. Might be that the general director started considering this option for the future. In the current circumstances, of course, no one speaks of restarting the unit, but the conditions might change in the future. And it is important to understand that the question of restart should be discussed with the actual owner and not with Russia, who has occupied this power plant. And Mr. Grossi already started some negotiations with the current occupant. If the power plant stays in the hand of Russia in the changed circumstances, that's also not normal to consider restart of the unit in this new situation. So IAEA should consider that. But Alexander really mentioned that we do have some questions. Let us see what we were asked. Question number 1 from Alexander Melnikov. What about other nuclear power plant? Kurskaya nuclear power plant, for example. Should it also be stopped? What can you say about the... Okay, no, I will start with the first question. The second question goes in a different direction. So there are 2 main nuclear power plants which are still functional in Ukraine, and they do their best, so to say. We already have heard that Russia systematically tries to destroy the energy infrastructure of Ukraine. Russia is bombing the grids and thermal plants and everything which is not working with nuclear fuel has already been bombed. The nuclear power plants are still not attacked. Thanks God. I don't know, maybe there is still some common sense in the Russian military people head, but at least these nuclear power plants are still intact. The nuclear power plants of Ukraine cover around 50% of the energy needs of Ukraine. So Ukraine cannot stop them. It's impossible to live without electricity in a modern country. So Ukraine has no choice. Ukraine has to keep on working with the two present nuclear power plants still intact. Yes, the risks are there, but still, Ukraine has no different choice, as I have already explained. The Kurskaya nuclear power plant is like 50 kilometers away from the border on the Russian side. And there were attempts of attacking it, but not serious ones, and I hope that it also stays like that. We live in a situation which is connected to a lot of risks. But at least I have the feeling that there is a kind of mutual law that neither Ukraine nor Russia attacked nuclear energy objects. At the same time, Russia is systematically destroying the energy grid of Ukraine. I would say that 80% of it are already destroyed. We already spoke that if a nuclear power plant is working, it should give away the energy somewhere. So if you destroy the connection lines between the power plant to the users, the power plant gets isolated. So that is basically what Russia does. Russia is destroying the energy grid of Ukraine, and that is very, very sad situation. The winter is coming, and that is inevitable. Yesterday, I saw pictures of the level of destruction of the energy grid in one of the regions. Russia has launched 12 missiles in the last weeks, which have almost completely destroyed the grid in this certain region. Okay, thank you. There is also a third part of the question of Alexander Melnikov. Do you have data about how many nuclear specialists from Ukraine have become Russian citizens and decided to work there? No, we don't have data to this subject. We do have some data from both sides, but the nuclear power plant operators are the most valuable people, and we don't have information on them. There are around 5,000 employees which came from the Ukrainian side to the Russian side. But the question is, how many operators are among these 5,000 people? Maybe there are some dozens, maybe, I don't know, maybe 200 specialists of this kind. When we speak about the potential restart, we are speaking about restarting one energy unit. I think that it is possible to find a big enough team to run this one energy unit out of people who decided to work on the plant also in the Russian occupation. But it's still not a normal situation. It's impossible to get a nuclear object working only out of reason that you have experience in this field. You need control. Grossi spoke about disturbances on all 7 levels of control for a nuclear object. So if you have enough employees, it's still not enough to guarantee security. But it is complicated to analyze the situation. The technical aspects are easier to analyze, but we cannot analyze the situation with the specialists. We have access to the technical aspects due to satellite pictures, but the topic of specialists is an internal question. We don't have access to this information. Let's switch to the next question. Aditya Parik. That's a long question. Why didn't Rosatom include this power plant into its annual report? Why can't you see information on it in the podcast? To explain why I asked the question. In the public discourse, Rosatom is actively in the podcasts, and these are considered as indicators on the international arena that Russia does not want to create nuclear incidents. They do not want to provoke a catastrophe. It is a complicated question about how Rosatom is positioning itself in the world, and what is the position of Rosatom towards the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plants? We know that Rosatom is an international company present in the international nuclear market. Rosatom must keep its face, not to be associated with such nuclear objects in gray areas. So maybe they try not to push this topic. On the other side, Rosatom is the company which is dealing with this nuclear power plant. They are responsible for its functioning. They are responsible for the so-called new occupied territories. There is no direct answer to your question, unfortunately. Probably it's an attempt to combine things which cannot be combined. By the way, yeah, there are different Rosatom centered media, and they have very limited information on the topic of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant there. They basically try to send out advertisement information, but not details. They somehow are a bit shy, if Rosatom can be shy at all, that they have to work with Zaporizhzhia NPP. And yeah, the international community knows that physically the NPP is currently on the Russian territory, but there is a special structure constructed or created to deal with the Zaporizhzhia NPP. This structural unit is actually not even directly connected to Rosatom. And I think that it's a sign that they are not really sure of where the situation can change to in the future. Whether they already should state that this NPP is forever theirs. There are a lot of open questions in this respect, and we are observing this situation very thoroughly. But that is true. Rosatom is not really representing the Zaporizhzhia NPP in its annual reports, in its media reports, etc. You are right about that. I would like to add another thing. The public annual report is an official document of the whole energy corporation, which is translated into English and can be accessed by the international community. So in this annual report, you will have minimal information about it. Mr. Likhachov also has never visited the Zaporizhzhia NPP in the last 2 years. He doesn't want to have a direct connection with this nuclear power plant. Yes, he does some comments about it, but still, he's not really involved. Kirienko is the one who visited the NPP, but he is now actually more a politician, although he still is in the board of directors of Rosatom. Kirienko has visited Energodar several times, but he is more responsible for political questions, and Likhachov has never been there.
Well, yeah, Mr. Kirienko is a political figure. He's a deputy chief of Kremlin administration, and well, that's what he's supposed to be doing, demonstrate his loyalty. Rosatom has a lot of responsibility on the occupied territories and especially in Energodar. Basically, they are now curators of Energodar and ZNPP as well. I want to add that Rosenergoatom's administration also visits that area. That's a subsidiary structure of Rosatom. Rostechnadzor is also visiting, which makes us suspicious. But these people are not political figures. These are not the kind of people who are going abroad to sign political agreements. Those are technical specialists. This might be a sign that the technical preparation is happening, even though there is no final decision within the Rosatom or within Kremlin about what to do. And I think the goal now is to prepare different scenarios, which I'm quite convinced they are currently doing, from the restart of ZNPP to the complete decommissioning of it. This scenario might be completely different. That's why we see more and more technical activity happening there, meeting tech specialists with Rafael Grossi, etc. But I want to add something for technical side. As you mentioned in your question, there is a certain controversy there. Rosatom is very active, launching new website, publishing a lot of informational materials about ZNPP, etc. But I want to note here that mostly everything is done in Russian language, and mostly this is for the Russian-speaking audience. Rosatom, yes, is responsible for the social economic development of those territories, and that's what Rosatom is supposed to be doing. That's the informational product oriented towards people living there. Well, and that's okay. They are talking to people living on those territories and explaining them how good a job they are doing. That's a propaganda for different target audiences. Inside Russia, they are demonstrating how they are managing the NPP, how they are doing such a good job, and they are very active because they are very good at that. And when it comes to foreign market, they are using Rosatom's chief and they're explaining what a good company Rosatom is. But there is nothing about really managing ZNPP. I mean, it's not a logical part of it. Let's take a next question. I'm sorry if I misspell your name. Petr Kurdilov. What's the timeline for Russians to build a new pumping station? I can't give you an exact answer. Probably we're not seeing something. Probably we are overlooking the beginning of the construction works. We've seen 2 potential areas for that, but probably we missed something. So far, we haven't seen it started. Our guess, well, since the moment when they start, it's completely possible to build it in 6 months. And there is also some limitation in water supply, but still, till the end of the year, they are. It's completely possible for them to finish it till the end of the year. We see from the satellites some actual works happening on the territories, but we don't know what that is. But for a pumping station, no. Another question, Anna Demis. Do you know whether Russian authorities consider ZNPP to be a burden? Does ZNPP use Russian resources Does it require additional specialists or security forces? Does such rhetoric exist? Or everything's fine and the Russian side is completely happy with occupying that? That's an interesting question. You probably recall that at the beginning of the war, they also occupied the Chernobyl objects. Then they spent some time there, they stole everything that there was to be stolen, and they left. When it comes to Zaporizhzhia, though, the situation is a bit more complicated. I believe that the Zaporizhzhia NPP, well, that's what I might think. It's kind of a burden for the Russian authorities because it's not like occupying a village or a city or a town. That is a technological and dangerous site that they've occupied and that they have to decide what to do about it. Like now, considering that the international community, IAEA, and Ukraine, everyone is against Russians being there. But nevertheless, we have what we have. There is still no political decision to relaunch. But from the data that we have, President Putin, during his meeting with Mariana Grossi, has stated that that is the intention. The chief of Rosenergoatom and the Rostechnadzor management, they felt like this was a sign to be there on the ground and wait for the signal to relaunch. Probably that's what's happening. But yeah, that is a complicated object. I don't know whether there are any regrets within Russian administration, but I believe Russia has to regret about many things that were done in the recent times. I would like to add here that the decision-making center in Russia is not exactly a center. It's not a one single unit. What happened on the territory of Ukraine became a surprise for many state structures even. Many people didn't know about that. And the decision was made, well, if not unilaterally by Putin, but within a very, very restricted circle of people. I know that they understand that the ZNPP is a very serious leverage that might be used against Ukraine, against West in the general terms, that might be used as blackmail for Western countries, stop helping Ukraine, because if you do, then something terrible might happen. That's an ace in the sleeve that might be used in a different way. Just to probe, will you be afraid if I do this or no? But for Rosatom, probably that's a burden. Technically, there is no advantage. They are not getting anything from it, but only spending money. I haven't mentioned that in my presentation, but I analyzed that in my report, the possible economic effect. It's also there. So far, we're only talking about expenses. There isn't any advantage that might be presented on an international market. Well, they're not earning anything from that. And inside there, well, there is a war happening. That is a state corporation. Obviously, the manager of a state corporation has to follow the orders. And no one really cares whether that's a hard thing for him to do. Well, he was told to do something about it, to figure whether it is possible to relaunch or not. And they are doing that. They are spending their resources. They're sending their people. They're trying to make their mind about how to include that as a part of their international strategy. And I'm sure they have to be very flexible because of the war. ZNPP is not the only one complicated project for Rosatom that happened during the war, but they're doing their job and they're trying to solve that one as well. What I'm trying to say is that there are different aspects there. It might be different thing, burden, advantage, ace, leverage. Putin tries to use everything. Another question, a new one. I can't see the name. Do you know about these occupied dangerous radiological objects? How do they account for them? Is that a part of a Rostechnadzor district or something geographically? Where does it belong? We don't know that exactly. I can only guess that this is a southern district. I mean, if they make it a part of their accountability system, this will be a part of the southern area. And now Rostechnadzor chief is responsible for that. So that's is a question to be considered in this central headquarters. Well, at least that's what we've seen. Personally, the management is overlooking what is happening. So far, I can't give you the answer here. Well, yeah, and that's not even that important for us. We see, looking at other structures, that the occupied territories are being integrated in electrical grids and things like that. But when it comes to high-level events, at every meetings with IAEA, it's always on the very high level. Managers and heads of Rostechnadzor and other institutions are always there. It's a very important object, and it's not being de-escalated to some districts, right, geographically, because there is no protocol, there is no legislative framework to work with that. It has to be reinvented on the go. And when you give some object under the accountability of a federal district of a country, well, that would require a lot of paperwork. Even if they want to do that, it will take them so much time. Yeah, that's a special status, I think. That's an exception. As you actually told, Rosenergoatom did not include ZNPP. Well, all the other nuclear power plants of Russia are branches of Rosenergoatom. ZNPP, legally, under the decree of Putin, is now the asset of Rostec Imущество. But there is a separate legal body created to manage the ZNPP, which is not a branch of Rosenergoatom. The new instruments are being invented as we speak, and it can change several times as the war unfolds, which is another testimony to the fact that it wasn't planned. Well, what we could occupy, we did occupy it, and we'll see what to do with that later. Another question from the same person. NPP means permanent procurement, permanent turnover of goods, services. We can probably somehow notice if there is an increased volumes of procured materials. Yes, that's definitely true. We see something, but it's very complicated to find that information, because we're talking about internal turnover of goods and services on the territory of military conflict. One needs to have some very special monitoring instruments to notice that, but you're quite right to suggest that. We're trying to monitor that as well. The NPP is kind of in a frozen state. It's there, it's not active, it's not working, it's not producing energy. That brings the procurement level down. So the procurement is now on the very default minimal level. That's probably we're not noticing anything. But yes, that's a separate risk, because the procedures have to be reinvented here as well. What has to be supplied? The equipment is a different one. Well, this is not Russian equipment. Obviously, those are Soviet units, but for 30 years, those have been operating in a completely different legal field. They don't even have spare parts. We know that Rosenergoatom has an import substitution program these days because they are no longer working with the contractors they used to be working in the past. So there is another risk about spare parts, maintenance. By the way, those also exist in the territory of Russia as well. Another question from Petro. Thank you. I have another question. Is it possible to work with the spent fuel from the ZNPP to increase Russian nuclear arsenal? And how Russia can actually expand its nuclear arsenal with the help of ZNPP? I can tell you that theoretically that is possible. The stock of spent fuel at ZNPP is probably the biggest on the territory of the former Soviet Union. Every year we publish a report on Rosatom. on what is happening with Rosatom. The volume and the amount of spent fuel on territory of Russia is not that big, but it's enough. And the reprocessing capacities that they do have in Russia is not enough to work with the spent fuel they already have. I don't see that much sense in bringing that spent fuel into Russia. And that kind of fuel, by the way, is not the fuel that is being processed in Russian Federation. So I don't think so. And well, there is no further area for the expansion of nuclear arsenal. It's not a question of finding nuclear material. It's about why would they need as much? I know why you're asking about this, and I can share the concern. Mr. Grossi has been talking about that at the early stages when they were discussing the potential risks, but thanks God, in the last couple of years, we haven't seen any movement of spent fuel from ZNPP anywhere. The spent fuel that is located on ZNPP territories can now be classified as the so-called dirty nuclear bomb, radioactive bomb, because that is true. It's highly radioactive. And if someone wants to build a dirty bomb, that would be a perfect material. But I doubt anyone will start doing this right now. Because, well, I at least hope people have enough responsibility not to do that, and the criminal parties will not be doing that. Well, they have enough work besides that. It's a question about like how the NPP should be used. If you want to use the NPP to scare the world with dirty bombs, well, we've seen that happening, but luckily that's mostly informational messages. It never happened on practice, but technically the light water reactors are not the perfect reactors for creation of the nuclear weapons. But that's a technical detail anyway. We should be more concerned about the physical security of the spent fuel, not for someone using it. The same participants are asking several questions, but yeah. Alexander Melnikov. In Energodar, how are they preparing for the heating season? And can we use that information to figure out whether they are preparing for the relaunch of the ZNPP? This year, for the first time, we can say that in April, all the units were transformed into the cold shutdown state. That didn't happen for the first time, but since the occupation, since September 2022, all the units were shut down, but almost all the time, 1 or 2 units were operating in the hot shutdown regime. That wasn't a relaunch of units. From the point of view of nuclear physics, that doesn't mean much. And it was needed to manufacture heat for the plant and for Energodar as well. In the winter season, 2 units were in hot shutdown operation. Now, and it took some time, and we've been monitoring that as well. We've been monitoring what Rosatom was bringing there. Were any steam generators, diesel generators, which were needed to provide heat to Energodar in the winter time. And they were doing that, which is an indicator that, well, I hope that they've generated enough redundant capacity to heat Energodar during winter and keep all the units in cold shutdown state. Unfortunately, the war will go on for this winter as well, and we do hope that the ZNPP units will remain in cold shutdown. And not only won't they be relaunched, but they won't even be transitioned into the hot shutdown. And Energodar isn't a big town, and there isn't a problem of providing, heat to Energodar. There is Donetsk, Lugansk. Those are way bigger cities. And I'm sure they'll be able to do that without the units. Well, at least I hope so. In the routing operation, before the war, the existing power plants were used for that. And the thermal power plants were used for that. And it actually was enough for Donetsk and Lugansk. Those are no longer in operation. But I think the logistics is way too complicated. I don't think it's that easy to achieve. That's probably another reason of considering scenario of relaunching the ZNPP when they don't really need to bring as much fuel, as much of technical parts. Probably that's another reason when they're considering that. But we hope this scenario will never be enacted. Another question. Vyacheslav Varvarov, what is Rosatom going to do with collaborators that signed the contract when the ZNPP will be given back to Ukraine? Well, you're asking me to answer the question, what will be happening after the war? I can't really give you the answer. That's not the field of our research and expertise. That's not only about the people who are there, because there are plenty of people who ended up there against their will. There's plenty of people who ended up on the territories of Russia against their will. So it's hard to tell. It's hard to say what Rosatom is going to do with those people. I mean, if these are subspecialists, they might start working on a different NPPs in Rostov or Voronezh, for example, Novovoronezh. I think they might find a job there, but I think that's not big of a problem. I doubt that it will be a problem, especially considering that there is not so many people there. Yeah, from my point of view, even though we can't really tell when the war will be over, I think a question that's more important is what Ukraine will be doing when it's gonna get the NPP back. Rosatom has 10 another power plants and a lot of personnel. They will find people, and I personally don't really care that much about it. The question is, how is Ukraine going to restore the premises? What's Ukraine is going to do about the people who Ukraine considers to be collaborative with Russia? Obviously, many of them signed those contracts under significant pressure and are now forced to work with Russia. What's going to happen to them? As far as I understand, by Ukrainian laws, those are traitors and collaborators. Will those people have a chance to keep working in the industry in Ukraine and in Russia? What's going to happen to Russia after the war? Well, that's yet another question. It's a political and legal one, not for us to answer.
These questions will be considered not by Rosatom, not by energy companies. It will depend on the legal aspect, on the laws, on people. How are they going to be considered? Ukraine and Russia will have to deal with these questions. I have the feeling that we run out of questions. We are talking to you already for almost 1.5 hours. Maybe it's time for conclusions, and that's the last opportunity to ask questions. Okay, I will start with the conclusion part. We really very much hope that the situation won't go to restarting the units of this nuclear power plant. That is going to be considered as a very certain strong step and change of the situation into the dangerous ones from military point of view, from energetic point of view, from political point of view. That's the first thing I wanted to say. The second aspect, maybe IAEA will still find a way to influence this situation and to stop these processes in some way. And last but not least, we hope that the resolution which has been signed in Switzerland concerning the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant will get the necessary attention. It's seldom that it goes this direction, but might be possible that Russia will listen to what the international community has stated. But the situation is very unstable and not clear. I don't have much to add. I hope very much that till the end of the war or after it has finished, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant will stay in the mode it's currently in, this called shutdown mode, which is the most secure and stable one. From technical point of view, it's also a huge risk. So it's unlikely that Rosatom will decide on its own to make this step. And I also very much hope that Ukraine won't endanger this nuclear object, because otherwise there is a possibility of a nuclear incident which will influence the region for decades. Okay, then thank you very much to everyone who has attained our event today. We'll see again. We will keep on monitoring the situation. I wish all of you a good day.